In economic terms, the Central Asian country of Kazakhstan is far better off than its ex-Soviet neighbors. It's rich with abundant oil and natural resources, and the government, led by President Nursultan Nazarbayev, knows how it wants the country to be perceived as a fast-developing nation with a bright future. The other side of the story, not told on state-owned television, is a repressive political system, a poor human rights record, and a crackdown on the media that is intensifying. The news outlets targeted by the government had key roles in covering the 2011 demonstrations involving oil workers in the western city of Zhanaozen. Since those riots, many private media outlets have become identified with opposition figures who the government contends are enemies of the state. Al Jazeera correspondent Robin Forrest J. Walker now from Almaty on the battle over the media space in Kazakhstan.
In Kazakhstan, raids on news outlets are a common occurrence. A day before the February raid on Respublika newspaper's office in the city of Almaty, I got a tip-off.
So were we going to film them coming in?
So our cameras were rolling when the security services knocked. Respublika was shut down by the government on charges of extremism back in December 2012. The paper, however, has continued publishing.
Несмотря на установленный судебным актом запрет 25 января текущего года, за номером 1 вышла газета «Репаблик».
The paper's name was changed. The masthead now reads Republic, and its weekly print run is under 100 copies. The rest of the news operation is online. Respublika isn't the only news outlet that's circumventing a government ban using legal loopholes and an internet connection.
The government issued a ban on two newspapers, Respublika and Vzglyad, the TV station K+, and many websites, about 40 media outlets in total. If it weren't for the internet and the availability of software that we can use to overcome state blockades, we'd be behind the Iron Curtain like in Soviet times.
There
are very few independent media left in Kazakhstan, and the journalists who work for this media are under constant pressure from the government. The entire might of the government machine is used to complicate journalists' lives. Court cases, personal threats, and beatings. All that has become the everyday reality of being a journalist in Kazakhstan.
Lina Zhdanova is one of the founders of the Stan TV production company. The organization has been in the government's crosshairs ever since 2011, when riots exploded in the western city of Zhanaozen. Stan TV was all over the story. The production company fed footage of government forces cracking down on protesting oil workers to channels broadcasting into Kazakhstan like K+, and from there the video went around the world.
So what people saw if they were watching Stan TV or K+, they were seeing user-uploaded content of those clashes, and they were seeing people being taken to the hospital. They were seeing fights between police and workers, which is exactly what the government doesn't want to have shown. The events in Zhanaozen really blew up the government of Kazakhstan's whole narrative about what Kazakhstan has been doing for 20 years. And so the outlets that made that information available, those were the ones that were hit the hardest.
The intimidation we'd experienced before was nothing in comparison to what happened after Zhanaozen. There were direct threats against our staff. Secret Service officers would come up directly to our employees and threaten them and their family members. They would call in the middle of the night and come to people's homes.
Their strategy was first to imprison opposition politicians who were supporting strikers, and then to connect opposition media to opposition party who supported strikers, and to close them down for political extremism.
Since Kazakhstan gained independence from the Soviet Union 22 years ago, it's had one president, Nursultan Nazarbayev. In 2010, he was formally named Leader of the Nation by an act of parliament. A year later, in the 2011 elections, the Kazakh Electoral Commission announced that the president had been re-elected with a percentage evocative of Soviet-era elections, 95.5%. According to the Nazarbayev government, there are almost 3,000 media outlets in Kazakhstan. It says it controls only 16% of them. But in reality, the other 84% are largely owned by groups or individuals affiliated to the regime. So, for instance, KTK, one of the main commercial channels, is owned by Dariga Nazarbayeva, the president's daughter. It's a restrictive media environment here, and defamation is still a criminal offence. For the Kazakh opposition, privately owned media outlets represent the last recourse. The government's stated justification for closing down news outlets is that they're funded by forces hostile to the government. The media outlets themselves deny that. However, the name of one man keeps coming up: former Kazakh energy minister turned Nazarbayev nemesis, Mukhtar Ablyazov. Ablyazov was living in exile in the United Kingdom, but fled the country last year when a judge there sentenced him to prison for contempt of court and for lying about his personal wealth. A spokesman for the Kazakh government wrote to us saying,
"The action taken against outlets such as Stan TV and other affiliated media entities came only after clear evidence emerged that they had a role to play in the tragic events in Zhanaozen. All outlets in question were funded and controlled by Mukhtar Ablyazov. I don't believe any country would allow an international fugitive to fund information attacks and use media resources to spread lies and call for violence."
The government sees Ablyazov as a direct threat to them, and even some of them probably see him as the main threat against the government of Kazakhstan. And so the affiliation of these outlets with Ablyazov is what the government has been cracking down on.
Tune into the state news channel Khabar, and it becomes clear not just how the Nazarbayev government sees itself, but also how it wants to be portrayed.
We have a massive pool of journalists in the service of the state, and their job is to describe the activities of our government officials. The channel has wide reach and is watched by many. There's a joke from the Soviet times. When people watch Khabar, they say, "I want to live in this wonderful country where everything is so nice."
We live not in Kazakhstan, but in Wonderland, if you watch Khabar. Everything's perfect. Nazarbayev goes around the country, opens schools, helps farmers. Our economy is growing. Everyone has jobs. Perfect, perfect country.
But the impressions created on Khabar and the photo opportunities featuring the leader of the nation don't come close to telling the whole story.
Kazakhstan hasn't used its wealth to develop institutions, and the media is a key part of this. It's very difficult to resolve people's grievances if you won't allow those grievances to be voiced in public, which is what a free media does. It finds problems, it examines them, and it brings them to the attention of society. And right now the government of Kazakhstan is discouraging that from happening, and it's going to cripple the country's development.
I hope we will be able to continue our media work, but the situation is complicated, and I'm not too optimistic. I just watched this movie, Life of Pi, a story about a boy who survives a shipwreck and is stuck on a lifeboat with a tiger. Somehow, the story of Pi reminded me of our situation. We are in a similar ocean of problems, trying to survive. And maybe our secret services play the role of the tiger. It keeps us alert and stops us from giving up and sinking to the bottom. As long as we are resisting, we are alive.